Be quiet.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. James Lyons-Weiler coming to you live from the WWDNYK studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is our second episode of Unbreaking Science today. Earlier today, I did how to understand dynamic modeling in... Go look at that video so you can understand when an epidemiologist says that they changed their model, it means that they changed their model based on new information, not that they're admitting that they're wrong. But that was this morning. Today, I have a great guest for you guys. Many of you know him. Many of you love him. This man is an exceptional radiologist. He has a big, huge heart. He is skilled at the art of undoing the harm of toxins in nature. And I like to call him, and he calls me, brother from another mother. Everybody, welcome Dr. Ted Fogarty, MD. Ted, what's going on here?
Hey, thank you. From the land of milk and honey, North Dakota. And this has got a little bit of Minnesota honey in it, too. Good to see you, Jack, as always. As you were born and raised in New York, and I've just kind of shown off some of my neurosurgery buddies up here.
That's beautiful.
So there's a particularly incredible one-handed catch artist who has signed that helmet, and his uncle is my friend and colleague up here in Bismarck, Dr. Alan Van Norman. And so we are looking to educate and help everyone understand in a language that hopefully we can get everybody to easily understand through a lot of analogy, just in regular gearhead mechanics, football talk, and transitioning and segueing into what is the greatest intracellular performance agent from evolutionary biology, in my humble opinion.
Okay, let's warm up to that. I got a question for you. Yeah, glutathione. We'll get to glutathione, vitamin G. My question for you is, do we have to put a disclaimer out there that this helmet does not protect you against coronavirus?
Yeah, that might be wise. Maybe that is wise.
I think so.
But if I put on my safety goggles,
there you go.
I got a face shield for my eyes a bit here. I went to the post office today, and they got cellophane. They got the big saran wrap cellophane all in front of all the postal workers. So, as we both know, probably the worst problem with fomite transition for all viruses is it's probably our cell phones, actually. Okay, so you got a dirty cell phone, and then you're touching that, or you touching some other object,
like
and
a gas
you rub
pump.
your eye.
Yep.
And then that's really the portal through which a lot of viruses are getting into your upper respiratory situation. Your eyes drain into your nasal cavity through. We
definitely need to keep our hands below our shoulders. And when I go gas up at the pump, I bring antiviral wipes and I wipe down both sides of the pump. If nobody's on the other side, I wipe the handles, I wipe the buttons. I do my part as a good citizen to disinfect the world around us.
Yeah.
So,
well, I picked up. I've got these little small aloe vera containers that sometimes I'll use for some just pre-COVID-19. I would use it just for ultrasound scanning of physical exam type of work. Some of my patients up in Rugby, and then there's such a run on all the hand sanitizers everywhere, of course. But went over to the local liquor store and picked up some grain alcohol and some little similar size bottles, just mix that up 50-50. So, it's a little bit of
got to do your
duct
parts.
tape and baling wire,
So
North Dakota solution.
All right, cool. So today we're going to go through a few things. Glutathione is vitamin G, says Ted Fogarty. This gives us a relaxed, laid back, take our time, step through the thinking here of glutathione. For people who don't know, they watch an Unbreaking Science, they don't know what glutathione is. Let's give them a little bit of a rundown, Ted, if you don't mind, what glutathione is and why we want it.
Yeah, well, let's just start at the beginning, about 2.5 billion years ago. So the forerunners of what are now spirulina, cyanobacteria, basically algae, started this whole glutathione molecular kind of slam dunk contest with oxygen on how we all help our cellular performance. So 2.5 billion years ago, evolutionarily speaking, there's a milieu, a soup of sorts of cells on the planet that are not processing photons, and somehow some decide to or develop the capabilities to capture energy from the sun. And in that photosynthetic play on leveraged oxygen-based economy in this great world of ours, we have the cyanobacteria basically using the photons from the sun to create sugar molecules. And in doing so, all that great carbohydrate and sugar is kicking out as a waste product oxygen and a little water. And then that oxygen is, pretty toxic to these unicellular photosynthetic organisms. So the three almighty amines, the vital amines of unicellular vitamin G, are brought in from the outside world across these unicellular membranes, these little vessels, starting to populate and increase the oxygen content of the atmosphere in rapid fashion. So glutathione gets assembled inside the cell from these three primary amino acids, and then protects the cell from not only the oxygen, but the employment of the genius of, God-given evolution, is that, hey, there's this really great tripartite molecule here, this little threesome that comes together, protects the cell from oxygen in all these photosynthetic organisms, and then can go around and protect the cell from other periodic table elements that are inducers or electron thieves of oxygen itself, and are pro-oxidants like iron, lead, mercury, gadolinium, all these elements that we have in the periodic table that are pro-oxidants at an intracellular level, they become harmful. So this is where the great shutdown quarterback of toxicity, which is glutathione intracellularly, comes in to chaperone those bad actors outside of the cell, and in the fully evolved sentient beings that we are as humans, then that stuff goes out in the bloodstream and then out your kidneys and your liver.
Right on. So we are labeling and tagging with glutathione, and if you don't have enough in your blood, then the toxins are free to do their thing, and they interact with reactive oxygen species in a nasty way. So you, as a medical physician, you look at the end product as a radiologist. You look at the end product of disease processes, toxins, and so on. And I want to explore a little bit with you exactly the type of science that we have that says that glutathione and hyperbarics, which to tie those together, as you mentioned just in our pregame earlier, it's the same thing because hyperbarics takes care of the reactive hits the HIV here. Here's an envelope virus with hyperbaric oxygen, and it's actually this study from 2000. It's a hypothesis, but nevertheless, it has an antiviral property itself as possibly. You're looking at this as viral disintegration. Tell us about an optimal use of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, if you don't mind, for somebody who might be suffering from coronavirus infection, let's say.
Well, yeah, our virtual global dean of hyperbaric medicine, Dr. Paul G. Harch, down at LSU in New Orleans, is putting out some very important communications regarding that. But
I have that.
Just going back into history in this country, especially, we have a history with this already with the Spanish influenza epidemic 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, 1917, 18, 2 years, I think, of obviously one of the worst and scariest moments in public health and infectious disease biology was the Spanish influenza, which is what we have here now is kind of a similar situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. But in the midst of that crisis, the first chair of anesthesiology at the University of Kansas in Kansas City, named Orville Cunningham, who actually did his undergrad work at my alma mater here, the University of Chicago. This is a baseball cap from the 1947 baseball team there. So Orville Cunningham is out in the Midwest doing some incredible work in anesthesiology for a number of a couple of decades, coming out of U Chicago and medical school in Omaha. He grew up in Oklahoma, actually. And so Cunningham starts to realize that there's a higher death rate in the Rockies and at higher altitudes, and theorizes that, okay, maybe there's something to atmospheric pressure. And of course, he's an anesthesiologist, and we all call these guys the gas jockeys, and which they are in medicine. So he comes up with this theory that if people are dying at a higher rate in the Rockies than, say, in New Orleans or New York at sea level or out in California on the coast, then maybe we should just give people, feed them a little extra barometric pressure. Kind of simple. So he's got this big super tanker, literally outside of his house in 1917, 18, that he built and engineered, and one of the medical students at the University of Kansas became deathly ill, and Dr. Harch has put out a nice historical on this in the last several weeks. But this medical student was, under Hippocratic principles, basically about to die, and everybody on the faculty said, "Hey, let's throw him in the tanker," and they recovered this kid. And just like penicillin, just like a lot of the biggest medical breakthroughs in the history of our arts that go back thousands of years, it's usually just that one striking case that kind of gets a lot of people to think, hey, well, that's a big deal on how this all works. Now we have to figure out and reverse engineer it from there to explain it to our scientific colleagues. So again, and he just used air pressure, but when you're increasing, using the laws of thermodynamics, when you're increasing the gas pressure in the human body or in dogs respond incredibly to hyperbaric pressure, especially for concussion. And but when you do that in mammalian vessels or bodies, you're increasing the dissolved oxygen and the increased reactive oxygen species on a scientific level. All triggers NRF2 signaling. So NRF2 for the folks out there who aren't scientists or physicians, it's just an acronym for cytoprotective protein. It is kind of like the big linebacker, the good police officer, the helpful CB engineer that's inside of our cells, that's going to go and say, hey, we've got a problem here, Houston, we got a problem. And by NRF2 starting to get triggered by increased reactive oxygen species, it goes out and actually signals immediately to start producing more glutathione. Mm-hmm. So it's a cell signal agent for all of these other genes that are incorporating these 3 amino acids from outside of the cell. Say there's signal calling. NRF2 is basically signal calling and quarterbacking this and saying, hey, we need a triple receiver set here, and we need to go long with these 3 receivers, and they're going to come together and do some crossing routes, and we're going to score a touchdown and save our cell and ourselves. And so intracellular glutathione synthesis is really, it is the most basic accounting system for cellular health. And so when cells are in crisis and NRF2 starts signaling, hey, okay, we need to get a lot of glutathione in here from the reactive oxygen species. Mm-hmm. That's one pathway, but the NRF2 gene can actually also just be directly triggered by an abundance of these 3 amino acids, which are glycine and once inside the cell, cysteine and glutamine. So those 3 are the 3 that combine inside the cell for our GSH, vitamin G, Wonder, well, I call it Wonder Woman. They basically lassoing up all these other actors and actresses at the cellular level to further encode proteins and regenerative medicine plays that really have been defined in the basic sciences, increasingly so over the last 20 years.
Cool. Okay, so we're looking at intercellular signaling as well as intracellular protection, because the mitochondrial damage is certainly reduced and protected as well. I've loaded up here, Ted, for people to see also, because I'm such a fan of really well done science. The study here that you have with Dr. Harsh and others, this hyperbaric oxygen therapy for mild traumatic brain injury, persistent post-concussion syndrome, a randomized controlled trial. And if you'll bear with me, what I'd like to do is jump ahead to the conclusion. Sorry, we're going to go through this. We'll come back to these if you want to. But basically, the conclusion of the study were a course of 40 daily, 5 days a week, 150 kPa, 60-minute HBOT treatments delivered to civilian and military subjects with a persistent post-concussion syndrome of mild TBI of average of 4.6 years after their last TBI, that's traumatic brain injury, folks, resulted in significant improvements in post-concussion symptoms, cognitive variables, memory, cognition, speed of information processing, and behavioral emotional problems, anxiety, depression, PTSD symptoms, sleep, and quality of life. Compared to a randomly assigned control group, these improvements were duplicated in the control group after crossing over to HBOT. In both groups, most of the improvements were sustained and even improved for some tests nearly 3 months after the last HBOT, suggesting HBOT is a life-modifying therapy, disease-modifying therapy for mild TBIs. And so, Ted, this is really cool. And people...
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is really cool because you guys have a track record in Alzheimer's. You have a track record in suicide ideation in veterans, which is absolutely huge. And you also have a track record in helping individuals who have suffered prolonged oxygen deprivation with cognitive kind of stalling cognitively and kind of a reboot. So We haven't really talked about hyperbarics, you and I. We've been so busy in, structuring and fulfilling other duties and so on. Where do we stand now? Is it spreading like wildfire? How many people are in your organization?
Well, I'm not going to focus on the number of people, but globally the number of patients in the world who have been helped by Dr. Hart's protocols, Dr. Hart's understanding of this, he's been doing it for 30 years, is growing exponentially. And whether it's vitamin T / laws of thermodynamics and vitamin G coming in that way, or vitamin G directly, and then another play later from Hyperbarics is it's all a very easy. It's actually a very easy thing to implement in theory. It's just hard to professionally get that into American medicine. But in Israel, in Tel Aviv University, Dr. Shai Efrati, who has 440-person chambers, has really the biggest hyperbaric program on the planet, and their group is just doing incredible research too, and using MR tractography studies to also show what we've shown over here in America over the last 12, 13 years with SPECT and PET scans. They're showing some incredible stuff in the whole TBI realm, as well as even fibromyalgia. But when you get to the simple wordsmithing and understanding of what's going on here, is that this is the pleiotropic power stroke. So pleiotropic, just as you know, it's a term that just means many ways.
Yep.
And so from glutathione specific pleiotropism, there's 144 major pathways that are stimulated intracellularly when there's an abundance of glutathione. And if that's coming from hyperbaric oxygen, that's actually the fastest way in an individual to actually ramp up glutathione. My genuine joy is with the vitamin G and hyperbaric pressure mediated healing processes is in pediatric medicine. So, got a little honey over here and a little fun little Kermit the Frog kind of thing here. But when Dr. Harch actually used 1.3 atmospheres of 21% oxygen to revive a semi-vegetative child named Eden Carlson, in 2016, that was published in 2017. It was this huge breakthrough. It's like, how powerful is this? Yeah. We've got these children who are languishing in a semi-vegetative state, and if they could just get into a simple pressure vessel, that would help them. But historically, when we go back in the history of U.S. medicine, the Bluxom airlock chamber, which I have one of the last two of these chambers as a museum piece in my office in Rugby, North Dakota. It was in every single hospital in the 1950s, and before we had NICUs off the ground in the 1960s, there's a lot of blue babies who were born with HIE and basically just anoxia at birth, who were put into these 2 psi chambers and given a 60% oxygen fraction at 2 psi, and they were revived. And the entire medical culture through the 50s was really on board with this whole process. And the U.S. Army published in 1952 that a number of bases had implemented the Bluxom airlock chamber, and they had significantly dropped their rates of neonatal death from HIE and anoxia at birth. And so Bluxom, who was this genius pediatrician down in Houston at St. Joe Hospital back in the mid to late 40s, he just kind of, just by his horse sense, kind of noticed that, we have a lot more blue babies from cesarean sections, and it's the 1940s, and there's no NICUs, and and he's basically, a pediatrician in hospital and taking care of what he can for these kids, and he comes up with the theory, a hypothesis of, what's the ballpark maybe pressure squeeze on these kids and their chests as they're going through the vaginal canal during a normal vaginal delivery. And so, he just kind of sticks a thumb in the wind, but let's just call it 2 psi, and the uterine contractions themselves that are going on in the whole birthing process. And then so we've extracted that when we do cesarean sections, and so there's all amniotic fluid that's sitting in this newborn 1-day-old baby's lungs and alveolar sacs, and the resuscitative measures that are going on in the 1940s are somewhat inadequate. And so his hospital experience, I think it was in 49 when they finally deployed it, after he had, I think, basically put it into the medical literature in 46 as a concept. He and his team basically had something on the order of 88 neonatal deaths, from asphyxia and hypoxia in the year prior at St. Joe in Houston, and then they dropped it down to something like 8. So it was a huge, exponential decrease, and so that all went out into the world. And there's a lot of people that fought in the Vietnam War and lived through the 60s who probably wouldn't have been here if it weren't for this whole 1950 phenomenon of all these children getting into hyperbaric chambers. So people in medicine have no idea that we've had hyperbaric medicine in this country for over 120 years, and it all goes back to New York, James. It goes back right to the bridge builders of New York and Caisson's disease and the New York neurology crowd, and one in particular, J.L. Corning, who was taking care of the bends and just with air chamber vessels and healing these punch drunk civil engineering divers who are digging the deep pylons and caissons for all of the beautiful, architecturally beautiful bridges of New York City. And he theorized and put into practice that when you put somebody in a pressure vessel and give them a pharmaceutical, then his pharmaceuticals and formulations of the day, they weren't from these big drug companies. They're kind of like, naturopathic kind of ideas. But he would take, like St. John's wort for depression. And, back in those days, neurologists were also psychiatrists. But this guy actually invented epidural techniques that have been helping women in labor, with epidural anesthesia from, in the 1880s, 1890s. And onward, and I'm practicing that version of that art too in North Dakota. So this guy, this incredible physician, starts taking his psychiatric patients, gives them the St. John's wort or whatever preparation and formulation he's got in his New York office of psychiatry, and then puts them in a hyperbaric chamber for an hour with just a mild air run, low subclinical of what we would call clinical hyperbaric pressures for nowadays, and starts to see an obvious improvement in his clinical gestalt and history of practice by doing this additive supplemental pressure therapy on top of what everybody was doing in psychiatry and neurology at the time. So, when we combine these ideas across medicine, and we do this all the time in radiology, I mean, we're always adding a various contrast agent or medication, pharmaceutical to a new device, and then we have a new device, and then we're then imaging older pharmaceuticals, and so the whole intertwinement of device-based medicine and medical indications in medicine, a lot of that crossroads is right through radiology, because we're both pretty much 50-50 on devices and pharmaceutical interventions, mainly for diagnostic purposes. But back in the day, of course, we all had to actually be radiation oncologists too.
Mm-hmm. So
a lot of history there, a lot of great stuff. Dr. Harch is, this paper that came out is basically just another. It's the grand finale of what we should be doing for all of our veterans in the nation, and based on this whole phase 1 study that I was in with him on, and this is basically the endpoint of that whole research paradigm to justify that we should already be using hyperbaric chambers to help all of our veterans and therefore anyone with PTSD and TBI related issues, veteran or not, should be a covered indication at this point. There's more evidence to cover this hyperbaric medicine for TBI and PTSD. There's actually better data there than what we historically really have in the fuzzy data of breast imaging. And I know that's going to be kind of politically sensitive, but I'm not saying we should stop doing mammograms. I'm saying we should continue to do mammograms on basically grade BC kind of evidence, and that precautionary principle in the ages of 40 to 50. But we should also be employing these wonderful and very simple devices of physics, the MRIs and the CTs and the radiobiology and all this physics I need to know for being a radiologist. It's a heck of a lot more intense and in depth and a lot more rigorous than the simple concept of just changing your altitude so you can change your attitude.
So you'll agree with me, I'm sure. Oh wait, I have something open. Feedback there. Is that from your end? Sorry. So you'll agree with me, I'm sure, that we have in most allopathic medicine, we have this either or kind of mentality of right, and all those results that we just saw, they're very comprehensive. I encourage people to get a copy of that paper. We'll put a link with the video, but there's a whole system effect here. And when you see that many p-values that are significant on that many outcomes that are and otherwise completely unrelated systems in the bio, it reminds us that we are the body is one unit. We're not Cartesian, machines put together like one part affects the other. Everything's connected, and so I love seeing that because it fits, the whole health outcome. I would like total health outcome awareness in medicine because I would like to see artificial intelligence informing medical departments, medical teams, individual practitioners. This is your performance. You need feedback on your performance that is objective. Right? It's objective based on, health outcomes. It's not, right? And so you would then naturally, what happens to human beings in this situation, they go, well, then doctors would be ranked by the system and I might come in last, or I might be, considered not a good doctor, as opposed to accepting the challenge of being the best physician that you can possibly be based on real data. And this kind of level of information, this is a great study, and I'm really proud to know you guys for doing this. And this level of evidence is so strong. There's a particular table I want to focus on that I'm going to bring up here in the presentation on these slides. It's right towards the end here. The science is mounting right here. This is the one with all the different studies that are done. All right. There's a non-trivial number of studies that not just show variation in the impact of hyperbaric on health outcomes, but reproducibility. 2012 to 2018 in the present study, we're looking at significant reductions in problems and better outcome, better healing, better sense of well-being, just overall improvement of like you said, attitude with altitude, and everything
and I mean,
everything in medicine could be improved with adjuvant treatment from hyperbarics. It seems to me. I hate these overarching statements where it's like, oh, it's a cure-all and it's a this and it's that. But the
well,
reality is,
I just look at it from energy.
tissues struggle for resources, and they struggle under
Yes.
toxic load. And Dr. Maroon, who I had on last week, mentioned hyperbarics, and we talked about you a little bit, and that kind of led to this interaction. But for kids with autism, and autism is three totally different domains of behavior, right? Sociality, which is kind of like
Yeah.
psychology and personality, and speech, ability to speak, and which is cognitive, and so it's such an overwhelmingly positive addition. It's good to know that Dr. Maroon at UPMC is aware of it. My original question is this taking off like wildfire? It seems like I'm hearing more and more about hyperbarics being adopted by mainstream medicine, and I don't know if that's real or just my impression.
Well, it's both. Okay. So, from the inpatient and costly and I like to look at all this stuff from an economic point of view. And
Mm-hmm.
if we look at return on investment,
Yep.
and how much inpatient hyperbaric medicine costs versus outpatient hyperbaric medicine, and you kind of you throw that all into the big economic analytics cycle. There's a lot of hospital administrators and academic programs that are basically failing. They're failing all over the place because, in part, the rest of the physicians are not supporting their hyperbaric colleagues. And I've seen this up front and personal with a good friend of mine who's now retired in Omaha. He's the godfather of Omaha hyperbaric medicine. His name's Mickey Kime. And Mickey's program was really a well-funded program on the basis of the use of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for recovering dead, recently deceased tissue in jaws from ENT surgeons and radiation oncologists, basically killing all of the marrow in a jaw that has basically a squamous cell carcinoma. So that was all a great team up, and all these great things were happening between the Lydia brothers, who were actually from Chapel, Nebraska originally, and Mickey Kime. And unfortunately, the Lydia brothers ended up leaving UNMC, and then that program fell off a cliff. And there's a whole bunch of really actually sad stories from out of Omaha of, including with me and Paul Hartz, where there's children at Omaha Children's Hospital who have had anoxic brain injury and who have literally had a near drowning event in a West Omaha swimming pool. And I called in there and started barking at people saying, hey, look, just call Mickey Kime and Paul Hartz and let's try and help this kid. And, the docs on the ground were like, yeah, we'll try and do that. And then the risk management teams come in and say, no, we can't do that. And so you have this ridiculous kind of
administrators practicing medicine.
Yes.
The accountants are practicing medicine.
Right. And so now let's get back to the economic stuff. When we look at like what was the economic impact of just one kid named Eden Carlson in Arkansas on the Arkansas Medicaid funding of her healthcare. So by her natural history, she should still be semi-vegetative. She should be costing the state of Arkansas. So this happened in 2016, in February 2016, and it's now 4 years later. So every year of care after she was out back home in March of 2016 till now, it should have been at minimum $100,000 to take care of her, absent any pneumonias and other acute episodes. And that we would perceive and we would understand that basically the natural history of a severely brain injured child is then going to be another 20 to 30 years of that kind of life and horrible burden on parents and the family and the healthcare system itself. And so when you start to calculate all the derivative cost savings and resource savings that Dr. Paul G. Harch of New Orleans at LSU saved the University of Arkansas and the state of Arkansas, there should have been many big thanks to him for saving Arkansas, millions of dollars on one kid,
Well,
I actually started looking into being the chair of radiology at the University of Arkansas a couple of years ago because there was some outreach, and it was just like, hey, I'm associated with this case that occurred right there, and the kind of the strange vibe I got back in communications from the recruiter was kind of like, oh, okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Fogarty. We'll review your application and.
Yeah, well, in medicine, we have what are called perverse incentives. The perverse incentive is the more revenue you handle, the more there is for you to take, as opposed when they consider cost savings a loss. And I just recently found out that medical insurance is also part of this in the following manner. What happens is if they have to pay out a lot, say in 2017, 2018, they pay out a lot. What they do then is they put that out as a loss the next year. Okay, so they hold on to it, and then they report it as a loss in their next year's reports, and then they get the money back. It's an incredible windfall for them. So this perverse incentive, combined with the idea that we're going to homogenize medicine and bring forward practices and standards of care that tend to be profitable and not those that we're going to lose our shirt on. Obviously, if you're going to not lose your shirt, but if it's 14 cents on the dollar that you make as opposed to 28 cents on the dollar, and an accountant's telling you, hey, we need you to do the 28-cent deal, not the 14%. Why? Because, well, clinically, the clinical why never comes into the question. They're actually, human pain and suffering is increasing. Profit spirals out of control. It's a positive feedback loop. And our country cannot possibly sustain this. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what this COVID-19 does. Because COVID-19, I think, is going to, this coronavirus is going to shine a huge, bright light on all the weakest links in the chain. Right? And where in the world is the insurance company going to get a payoff from COVID-19? Where is that supposed to come from?
This is where the insurance companies. Okay, so I'm just going to defend the insurance companies a little bit here and the medical directors of them. They're in a complex where they don't really have. They're everybody's so beholden to all of the dollar bill. Okay, right?
Yep.
And how you present it is a big deal. But when you present the concept of the greatest return on investment is in all medicine and wellness is how fast can you get the intracellular expression of glutathione going on in a human being, and that very little, actually it's a very little input when you're just feeding your cells three amino acids. It's the greatest return on investment is just, to look at, the work of, another great New York physician and psychiatrist who, was born in Omaha, but went out to New York and went to Harvard Medical School, Dr. Albert B. Crum. He has written the prescription in thank you for that, Jack. I get a little heart scream when I look at my mentor and friend, Dr. Crum there. So he has written the prescription actually in patent intellectual property and the legal cover. And psychiatrists are, they're kind of like radiologists, we're kind of like journalists in medicine. Psychiatrists are really kind of through the power of word and law, they're kind of like lawyers in medicine. And so as he finished his career for 50 years of psychiatry in New York, he embarked on this incredible endeavor in patenting the understanding of how the NRF2 gene works through the glutathione system, and how the most efficient way to get glutathione built inside the cell and trigger the NRF2 system is a combination, actually, of feeding the very basic building blocks, which are these just three little amino acid devices. They're just like little bricks. They go in, and then they feed the factory, which is powered up electrically by oxygen. Oxygen is the electron carrier molecule of the whole planet for all living beings that utilize it outside of anaerobes. So he's basically written the prescription, the IP, and basically patented, like, from a legal theory standpoint, he's patented everything that Paul Harch has been putting out in the world as just a run and gun, gearhead. We need to do this kind of on a Hippocratic principle because I see how this works, and that's where the three of us have come together over the last 4 years. When I met Albert and back in 2007 when I went down to meet Dr. Harch and hang out with my little brother Robert Fogarty, we've all come together into this. Basically, we're kind of like a double helix. We're intertwining these panels of the very simple concept that all cellular accounting of energy is really related to, you could say, voltage from a physics standpoint, from inside to outside the cell. Mm-hmm. But the actual, that's like the digital currency model. But from within the cell, these are gold bricks. So these three amino acids go in as these little silver molecules, and then once they're put together as a threesome inside the cell, they are like molecular gold. And that's the Fort Knox accounting system of all of our cellular energetics and ability to heal and repair from within on a cell-to-cell level. And then when you collate that across an entire being, and you think of the gross domestic product of, say, the United States of America, well, look at the gross domestic product of a human being as how much glutathione is in all of their cells as a collective mass weight at any unit of time. And mm-hmm. when that level is dropping down, that's also the level by which you can say, oh, that person is very sick.
Okay, so let's talk about energetics and toxins. And before we get into, I think someone mentioned it as Hyperbarics in a can, the supplement that you'd like to talk about some. Yeah. But let's talk about the different. We live in an increasing toxic world, and in this toxic world, it includes things that we eat, includes things that we drink, we breathe, includes things that we inject, it includes things that we are surrounded by, and the whole system improvement of hyperbarics is somewhat replicated. This is your claim, that it's somewhat replicated by improving the diet in favor of a pro-glutathione, pro-immune disposition, right? So talk about that connection for us, Ted.
So, well, vitamin G, okay, which my uncle's trucking company, we're going to be doing ethical economic research in protecting his employees from not just any RNA viral infection, which is what Albert Crumb's formulation has been patented for in Canada. And these patents just came down from Canada in February that allowed Albert Crumb to lay claims to antiviral effects and of his formulation. And that all kind of dovetails right out of the science from January 2019, where he and his Georgia State team, including lead virologist down there, Julia Hilliard, they showed that interferon-free human cells, human placental cells, when infected with Zika virus, an RNA virus of similar nature to coronavirus and HIV and Ebola, by the way, when in her research, when she fed these 3 amino acids in the ProImmune 200 into cell culture to these human placental cells, it dropped the viral replication cycle by like 90%. And
Wow.
So you have this great, incredible piece of science coming out from Georgia State, and then in the same month, LSU and UND, me and Dr. Harch are publishing, the protocol that is basically how do you reverse dementia and demonstrate it statistically on the gold standard of imaging, which is PET scans, and clinically. And Dr. Harch has already done that, like over 12 times in the last 20 years. This is the first time we've actually published a gold standard imaging case report and statistical analytics of it. So, so getting back to the ROI concept, it's like, okay, so if I'm working with Chris Workman, who is my chief marketing officer for Molplat Hyperbarics, and we were on the phone just last week with Schmidt Liquid Trucking, and we're just gaming up, how can we save some money here for a corporation that has 300 truckers on the road across America, and a great safety profile already from my cousins who are CFO and COO. And how do we increase the safety index for those people, for those truckers, and give them their own personal cellular protective equipment of these 3 amino acids, and boost their glutathione levels in a very easy way through Immune Formula 200. And so we're going to be collecting data, economic data, on this program of basic, simple occupational wellness idea for just feeding the Schmidt Liquid Trucking Company's employees ad libitum. They don't have to do it. It would be unethical to say, oh, you have to do this. But I'm just going to set up a very inexpensive way for them to access Dr. Crumb's supplement, and then review the data later for the whole corporate organismal healthcare costs over the next year. I mean, obviously we've got some issues with COVID that are going to maybe kind of throw a wrench into what would have otherwise been a kind of a stream of data from the last 5 years that, we may see that, there's less access to elective procedures this year just because, like interventional radiology practices like mine, we can't even actually do that right now because we're all shut down in all hospitals. So, but long story short, if you just think of it from an ethical standpoint and a Hippocratic standpoint and a simple, commonsensical standpoint, it's like, hey, if you can feed these mitochondria, these 3 amino acids, which are in the right ratio, which we're already breaking down in whey protein and in other things we eat, but it's the right ratio, it's the right cofactor, it's all stoichiometrically designed by Dr. Crumb, and you can feed that to people and then decrease healthcare costs and increase safety for viral transmission issues, then why wouldn't you? And in my 4 years of practice with ProImmune 200 in pain management here in North Dakota, I've had numerous people go on this stuff as a prophylactic for when I'm doing an epidural steroid injection. I'm increasing their risk of infection. And this is some of these 80-year-old farmers and farm wives who are in terrible pain from a stenotic lumbar spine. There's no neurosurgeon that's ever going to touch them. And then, I'm getting called in as a fighter pilot with a needle, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this for you. It's going to help your pain for probably 3-4 months, maybe 6. But I want you to be on this ProImmune 200 stuff right away so that we protect the rest of your white cells, which are going to be actually they're going to be impacted by this steroid that's going to diffuse out of your lumbar spine area at some level, and it's going to increase your glucose if you're diabetic. And so there's all this, big big idea here is basically, let's just be ethical and feed people's white cells and their immune system cells what they need, because they're the, white cells and brain cells like neurons and white blood cells are some of the highest oxygen using cells in the body, and therefore, because they are the highest oxygen using cells in the body, they also need the most glutathione.
Yep. So I think I think what we should talk about, Ted, is the fact that we have knowledge about the high risk group that are going to be most susceptible to high morbidity and high mortality. We've got old people, we've got smokers, we've got males. All of these are risk factors. So I would think that a opportunistic prospective study, as this thing sweeps across various states, right, would be brilliant
bingo.
In nursing homes,
Yeah.
etc., to get this out as an emergency use for preventing morbidity, mortality, and then we have the data on that. So what's the plan on that?
Okay, so it's not from my hand here. It's not me.
Yeah.
Okay, it is not me and my friend Kevin Oberlander, who is a compounding pharmacist here in Bismarck, North Dakota. We are not going to be doing that. However, an incredible physician and compounding pharmacist named Dr. Laura Lyle is working hand in hand with Dr. Crum and has already begun a clinical observation study of in-home quarantined individuals with diagnosed COVID-19. Okay.
Is she in Georgia?
She's collecting data and using exclusively, her license to practice both compounding pharmacy as well as medicine. And she's got a big 4-state practice, and she's got a whole team put together to start to collect a whole bunch of observational data on her patients who are getting on ProImmune 200, and Immune Formulation 200 is going into the homes of these individuals who are reaching out to her. Thank you for putting her site up. She is an incredible human being, and insightfully, and right in New York City, right before the whole pandemic was really called on Sunday night, 3/8/2020. On 3/6/2020, we had a big meeting, Dr. Crum and myself and Dr. Lyle, and I had Dr. Hart piping in from New Orleans, and we all gamed up, how do we figure this out? How do we stop the pandemic? What can we do that's going to be the most judicious use of Dr. Crum's formulation, and where are we going to go with that? And so there's probably, Dr. Lyle will have by the end of May or maybe early June, she will probably have data of more than 3,000 people.
Wow.
Who have been, and I'm not going to say the word treated, but I'm going to say
nourished. They've been nourished.
They have had their intracellular glutathione levels massively boosted through the hand of Dr. Laura Lyle and her practices across multiple states, from Michigan down to Georgia. And she's right there, not too far from the CDC.
That's right.
And Georgia State is right where this whole science came out of, that showed that, hey, this is the intracellular shutdown cornerback.
Right.
For all RNA viruses by a simple chelation mechanism. Basically, the starter, the ignition for the viral replication cycle that Julia Hilliard demonstrated in this incredible scientific piece last year is free zinc. Intracytosolic zinc is basically the ignition switch for the RNA genome to turn on for all of these RNA viruses. And so, now Dr. Lyle is feeding all of these cells in a, I do tend to think of myself as a mitochondrial physician and a cellular physician rather than an organismal physician, but she is basically getting this out there all over the place in a very coordinated, well-documented fashion,
Yep.
and involving multiple outside clinics are going to start getting on board with her too, anytime soon, including Kevin Oberlander up here at Dakota Pharmacy. We're going to start doing a tiny little part of her data. But she's going to basically have the clinical observation study that is going to back up the Canadian patents, and those were filed actually in 2015. So this is 5 years in the making for Dr. Crum on the patent side, and she's going to be able to get all of these folks who I've been communicating with over the last 4 weeks at UNMC, Creighton University, up here at UND and St. Louis University. I've been really trying to work the back channels and say, hey, look, this is the great and conjunction function of medicine. And it's not like you got to stop using your other good drugs and all your other good things in medicine. No, just add these little three amino acids and to what you're doing in the ICUs, and what you're doing in quarantined individuals, and what you're doing in your other research and other clinical genius kind of points of view, and it's that simple. And when you go back to the basic biochemistry and how IV vitamin C was used with some pretty good success out there in China, ascorbic acid, all it does is basically recycles GSSH, the oxidized version of glutathione, back to the normal version. But if you don't have enough building blocks of sulfur substrate of these three amino acids, and L-cysteine in particular, if you don't have that on board, then your ascorbic acid is trying to recycle in a milieu of a dearth of actual cysteine molecules. So it's just so simple. And from I'm like a grandson of a farmer on one side and a grandson of an attorney on the other side, and it's just like, this is just my mission, is to just basically put into language something that everybody from farming and trucking and the average American can just kind of start to understand, is that when you feed your mitochondria, they're going to be happier and they're going to treat you well, and those white cells are going to have a lot of shields against friendly fire. And as you know well, cytokine storms are basically a derivative of too much oxygen in friendly fire mechanisms.
That's right.
In the war theater at the cellular level. And so when you equip all these white cells with these three amino acids, like Dr. Lyle is, and then they can go out and fight these battles and be in this war theater environment, and it's like they've got the best shields on the battlefront. And then that glutathione, actually, you can't really actually give people glutathione over a long period of time as GSH itself, because it has to be broken down in order to get into the cell anyway. So it's just cheaper, easier, better ROI to just take it orally in bigger doses than just pre-formulated glutathione is anyway. But so the way the cytokine storm in the extracellular space has to be kind of mopped up, and this is like this fine Italian latte. So you mop up the damage in the extracellular space by wrapping up a huge amount of intracellular glutathione, and then that can then diffuse out into the extracellular space and then go clean up the leftover gun shells of the fight in the war theater. And so really, if you just look at it from a military war theater kind of environment, and you look at individual white cells as like, the T cells are like the Air Force, and the natural killer cells are like the Marines, and you just look at like what Dr. Lyle is. Basically, she is like the admiral that has this incredible Navy deployed already, and a bunch of Marines on helicopters ready to go out with the three great amino acids that have defined life on this planet.
Okay, so glycine, L-glutamine, and L-cysteine is present in this dietary supplement, ProImmune. This patented particular mixture is the authentic pre-mix in a powder for bodily protection. I'm reading from the can here, and it's a production of glutathione, and it's a master antioxidant. This is not a paid endorsement, ladies and gentlemen. I have Dr. Fogarty on here because, well, I have confidence in what he has to say, and it'll be very interesting and fascinating to see what the study that Dr. Lyle is doing is going to do. I didn't know about the study before we talked about it, and people I think could tell from your reaction that I'm saying, "Hey, where's the science?" And you're like, "Okay, it's underway." So, for protection against coronavirus, it makes a great deal of sense to logically deduce that this approach might really reduce human pain and suffering, and that's what I'm all about. And so I'm happy to share this. I also have here. We're going to pause here for a moment and bring up the actual URL for Dr. Fogarty's resource on the Mo-Plat Hyperbarics. He's the founder, and honey. He's holding up honey. So I want to leave this for a minute, but you're not on screen. So moplathyperbarics.com. This stuff is think of it as a nutritional supplement, a dietary supplement. Don't think of it as a drug. Don't think about this as medical advice from me, certainly, and look at it as something to add to your arsenal. I know a lot of people are taking selenium because there's a study that shows that coronaviruses don't enter the cell as well if you have good selenium levels, not extra, just good selenium levels in your diet. And in this outbreak scenario where there's a lockdown, nutrition's going to suffer. So if you have the elderly and they're not able to go out to the grocery store, they're not able to get out and get the nutrition that they need, and if you can supplement their diet with this ProImmune complex. Look at the mad scientist here. Hang on, I want people to see that. Do that again. Do that again for us. What do you got?
Just a little old lab tricks from back at the University of Chicago when I was doing molecular genetics and sequencing the Keratin 14 gene in mice. But, a little pouring of a little honey and then getting some powder out on a scale is kind of fun stuff. And going back to, where we're going with this, and I'm responsible for actually quarterbacking medical grade honey getting into Iraqi children, and that was back in 2007. And it's just a simple pleiotropic play, but so medical grade honey, honey has been used for how long? Since for centuries. I mean, there's Egyptian pyramids that have honey in it, and thousands of years old, and it still doesn't rot and whatnot. But what's going on with honey and glutathione? What we're going to be doing here with a little bit of this Mo-Plat play in adding Dr. Crumb's vitamin G to some North Dakota products and just simple nutritional stuff is a big deal, because it's just adding. It's just an additive factor in all of the other good stuff that everyone should take this one message home, and not from any commercial side of anything, but whatever you can do to increase your NRF2 expression it's the holy grail. Forgive me for those who are not Christians, but it's the holy grail of all of medicine. And so by combining hyperbaric oxygen or other sources of oxygen, so medical grade honey actually creates a nanogel layer of oxygen, hydrogen peroxide when your cells react with it. When you just combine that with the glutathione precursors, amino acids from Dr. Crumb, you're getting this incredible synergy of health and wellness at the cellular level. but to the point now, getting to the big dogs in venture capital and in on Wall Street, there was a major catastrophe that occurred with AbbVie and Reata. They're two big pharmaceutical companies that kind of came together and said, hey, let's try and find a way to get to this holy grail of NRF2 expression. And they did all. They spent like millions and like tens of 15s, who knows, millions and millions of dollars on research to patent an NRF2 expression molecule. And in their clinical research, a couple of people died, and then those corporations, either probably AbbVie more than the other, but there was about a $9 billion loss in one day when it came out that their NRF2 play on pharmaceutical ideaship was crashing and burning. And so it's like, Mother Nature and markets are telling us in combination right now, hey, just get back to the basics. Get back to the basics, everybody. This is where, obviously we're public health has gotten us back to the basics with good hand washing. Great. Okay. IV vitamin C is coming out of China. Dr. Hart has been in contact with some smaller subset of hyperbaric physicians in China who have also got the avant-garde protocols for critical care hyperbaric medicine coming out of China, going to basically into Paul Hart's hands in New Orleans. There's all kinds of people in Italy that Dr. Lyle and Dr. Crum and I and a whole other team on the glutathione side of medicine, and we've been trying to get people in Italy to understand, hey, if you can feed yourselves these amino acids, you're going to do a lot better with a lot of what you're dealing with over there. And so just, simple, basic kind of stuff where you're increasing your intracellular glutathione is just going to, that's what shuts off the viral replication cycle. It's that easy. So I was talking to a venture cap guy the other day, and he's like from software realm, and I'm just like, these three amino acids are just, they're like the Boolean language or the Unix language or code. People who are into IT and coders, and as a computer scientist in medicine, which is what radiologists have to be too. If you're looking at the power of the word "and" in Unix or MS-DOS, AND, that's the 3 amino acid translational correlate to glycine, glutamine, and L-cysteine. Mm-hmm. And so when those are coming together in a code, it's so powerful. But if your code, or if you had a digital book of Shakespeare, right, and you had Macbeth, and every and in there had a virus in your digital Macbeth book, if there was a virus that somebody made that would actually turn the word "and" into or just delete the N here or delete the A there or just take the whole word out completely, imagine what the context of Shakespeare's Macbeth changes into when you don't have enough ands written in the right spots. Mm-hmm. Simple.
Yeah, it's gibberish.
That's the question, right?
No, yeah, it's gibberish. And as a person who tries to study language as well as the we all have our various struggles. I leave some words out from time to time, but I have people that help me with that. So, Ted, this has been a fantastic and fascinating interview. The nutritional.
I'm going to give you a hug like I can, brother. I love you, man.
I love you too, man.
I love
you. So let's talk about coronavirus. I would like you to address what you're seeing in radiology. What does it look like in the lungs?
Well, interesting from a lot of the Chinese side of things. They actually have less CT access and technology, and there's also a clinical idea of I think great merit in using ultrasound at the bedside to actually, when you do have in the lungs. COVID is mainly, it has a big peripheral distribution of airspace, opacification, and filling of the alveolar sacs. And so if you're out in a third world country, or you're not, in a place where you can get to CTs real quick,
Yep.
then you can do ultrasound, measure the pleural effusions, and also see into the lung tissue that's totally consolidated by ultrasound. That's the dirty, cheap thing. Of course, plain films, plain film X-rays, the Roentgen, which we've used for 100 years plus. Chest films show more of a peripheral infiltrate, but from an bioinformatics standpoint, you're going to love this. This is where we go with actually showing how fast we can turn around the biomarker of CT. So all these CTs on all these ICU patients, like in New York, and there's plenty of hyperbaric, chamber access in New York, let's just go down to New Orleans. New Orleans with Mardi Gras, they've got the highest they're getting exponential on this. And so, if let me just get a little more serious. If we have Paul Harch's team and critical care docs in New Orleans doing CTs and then instituting just an additive, again, just a supplement. It's a supplement which we all build in our own cells. It's the safest thing I've ever done in medicine. And we start, basically getting a bunch of this ProImmune 200 into these patients who are in the ICU, and then Dr. Harch can take a few of those, like the really critical ones, and just supercharge their lungs and their bodies with an hour or two of hyperbarics. Hopefully in an ICU deployment in hospital, that'd be great. And then we use the biomarker of CT, which we now have a huge global database. There's all these radiologists around the world who have a database basically of how long in the natural standard of care cycle does it take for a COVID-19 recovery to also show CT changes, also backing up the clinical story of recovery. And so So let's just say that in the usual standard of care practice from critical care medicine, absent the use of hyperbarics and glutathione precursors, let's just say it's 2 weeks for all of the CT changes to resolve in a recovery case. But then we do this additive glutathione hyperbaric research and biomarker idea, and then we can show in New Orleans with Dr. Harch and his team and all those folks, or maybe in New York, somebody will go with him, like Alan Katz, who's the Northeast chapter president of the Undersea Hyperbaric Medicine Society. But so there's all these people who are like listening to Harch and working on this for the worst of the worst cases. But so we use CT, and then we figure out, hey, look, these CTs and the clinical response is showing that we can get the worst of the worst out of the swamp in 3 to 5 days, just like what Orville Cunningham did, and had no imaging backup, no other backup than just everybody saying, "Wow, he saved this kid's life back in the Spanish influenza." So as a
let me ask you, if you were president of the United States and you could if you were president of the United States and you could nationalize, I know nobody wants to nationalize anything. We're not socialist here. But if you had to nationalize factories, what are the 3 things that you would have them do to help COVID-19 patients? To make factories create things. Go ahead. Go for it.
Well, I think Donald J. Trump should be on the phone with Paul Harch and Albert B. Crum right now.
I don't want to do that. That's fine. I'm all for that. But I want to accelerate this. I want to accelerate this. You're president of the United States. You're king for a day, and it's your decision, your call. You've got the keys to the factory. You're putting Americans back to work. What are they building in the factories?
We're manufacturing these 3 amino acids as a Manhattan Project as fast as we can, and getting them out to everyone in the country as well as everyone in the world.
Okay, that's one. What's number 2?
We just need to start producing these amino acids in bulk, in a huge bulk, amino acid factory system, and for the whole of agriculture, there's all these agricultural supplements, Purina, whatever. You get all that stuff into play for amino acid manufacturing for humans in this crisis. And also just go back to spirulina. Like my little green friends that are unicellular, spirulina in algae, it has a doubling time of like 24 hours in the appropriate grass food kind of, and I say grass as in GRAS, generally regarded as safe, food manufacturing kind of realm. So there's Earthrise is a company out in California that has been producing actually university-based research with spirulina. So you get these spirulina, you get these algae production lines going gangbusters, and you get the amino acid production lines going gangbusters, and you start throwing that stuff all into all these human beings that are infected with these viruses, and you're going to shut that stuff off pretty quick. Now there's other toxins too that are partly responsible and related to all this stuff, but like Wuhan has all of this pollution issue. And the Italians have an elderly population with a lot of smokers, and so there's a lot of terrain issues that are already kind of increasing mortality, and spread in these various populations. But there are waveforms that I use every day under an ethical imperative of ALARA, which is as low as is reasonably achievable for the diagnostic information that I need. But there's like 60 gigahertz waveforms and 28 gigahertz waveforms that are being broadcast all over the country. And screwing up our satellite data, and there's a whole another, like, it's a huge biophysical understanding of how we are depleting our glutathione levels from waveforms as well, and creating an easier milieu for these viruses to attack us.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciated Dr. Maroon's statement that stress itself is a toxin, and I know that there are a lot of people that want to push back and say the government's going to try to blame parents, child abuse on neurodevelopment. Let's not do that right now. What I want to say is you wouldn't believe the roller coaster that I've been on. I've been tracking this since mid-January, and I've been riding the curve. I've got two peer-reviewed. Two papers that are under peer review on the science. It looked like a bioweapon, or it looked like it was manufactured. Then it looked like it. Okay, now we can rule that out. And we have a pathogenic signature. So we found the damn thing back in 2005 in a Chinese lab from a bat. So we're kind of we're ruling out that it's a recent thing, and necessarily it certainly has an ancestor somewhere. People can agree with that, but and then pathogenic priming on top of that to say, wait a minute, if you get the infection, you could be more sick the next time you get it. If you get the injection, if they use the spike protein, you could get. That's what the science says. And so pushing all of that out, and I love all the messages from everybody. Say, Jack, take care of yourself. Make sure Grace is taking care of herself too. The huge level of stress. There's this psychological whiplash of the next thing that you hear is worse than the last. And the only thing that people in the past that have decided, I'm talking deep past, thousands of years, hundreds of years, our ancestors made it through by being excellent to each other, by being extra supportive of each other, by being extra polite, by giving up that last crust of bread because you love somebody, and we're not there, but we are there. So this is not a virtual experience. This is a real experience, and the stress toxin compounds the environmental toxins. We can't say either or, and I'm the guy that's breaking science on the bullshit of either or. It's either stress or it's aluminum. No. A kid that's stressed out and has Jack full of aluminum.
Sticker for you, Jack QB.
Right on.
Sticker for you.
Thank you.
Sticker for
He's
you.
going for it.
You're the QB of science here, and I'm just going to go back to my beloved mentor in the glutathione side of this world, and Dr. Albert B. Crum. This whole platform actually, he was a psychiatrist in New York for basically 50 years, and this entire platform that he encoded in patent law for the rest of us to have an umbrella of protection to be able to kind of legally say, yeah, you know what, actually this all does work this way, because of Albert Crum's incredible attorneys and the incredible attorney culture that he has employed over the last 20 years to get this whole concept and platform out into the world. It's kind of like basically being, like Steve Jobs and creating Unix or wrapping Unix coding into the Apple platform. And so Albert actually, years ago, he actually came up with this concept, stress watchers. And actually there was a big legal battle over that, which Weight Watchers apparently thought it was too much of a trademark infringement, and he trademarked the actual concept of vitamin GSH-S in the World International Patent Organization in Switzerland. And so he's got he's got the whole world covered, actually, and has been for all these years, in saying, hey, look, if we all understand this way, we can start to make some statements that just follow from basic science and evolutionary biology in how important stress is. And psychological stress, it goes just right through the hypothalamic axis into your adrenal glands. And so when you are stressed for any reason, if it's just your user interface, your visual interface sees a very troubling image, and your adrenal cortical axis is triggered.
I'm going to tell people right now one thing that they can do to reduce. One thing that they can.
On the glutathione side.
I'm sorry. I'm going to tell people, building on what you're saying, but there's one thing that you can do right now. If your parents are still alive, regardless of your age, there's a physiological change in your parents' brain when they see your face. So if you're worried about your parents' well-being and you want to help their health right now, they're stressed out, they're older, they're at risk.
Beautiful.
Video call them every day. Say, hi, Mom, how you doing? And call your mother, okay? Call your father. Let them know that you're okay. That moment of seeing the parents seeing their child face, science has shown, has a healthy effect on your parents. Do them that grace, do them that kindness. I don't care if they drive you crazy. You love them. Take care of them that way. Okay.
Yeah. And, have fun. In medicine, and some people don't, kind of get this. This is my honey-do list goggles. But we actually do have some kind of off-color jokes in the trenches that we call, well, I just won't get into it, but just, people just getting into a childlike playfulness in a safe way with their family. And, if you've been outside, wash your hands and protect your family, protect yourself. But then once you're in that domicile and in that home, do things together and play together. And obviously we've got all these high schoolers and grade schoolers who are home already, and that may actually be an incredible silver lining of all this, as the nation where business was always first.
Yep.
And as a capital driven country, this is actually giving us an entire social societal, just slow down here. Let's everybody just
reconnect.
Do a winter count here, which the Native Americans always used to do on the plains, and they still do. But this is our winter count, and it's kind of like we need to appreciate each other.
Absolutely, and we have to have fun, right, Ted? We got to have fun, right, partner?
Yes.
We got to have a good time,
exactly.
Man.
Nice. Way to cowboy up, man.
That's right. So this is actually my homage to the Wild Doc, Dale Brown. So anyway, No, you're a good man, Ted, and I really appreciate all the time that you put into trying to help people understand, all these complex things about glutathione and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The best way to take care of yourself. I'm going to get real serious. I'm going to get real serious on the science, as if like I'm just warming up, people. I'm literally just warming up. I think Ted called. We talked to a couple of weeks ago. He's like, "How many peer-reviewed articles on COVID do you have in the submission right now?" Listen, we wrote that thing on Zika, and I'm not sure that these journals that are beholden to pharmaceutical companies are going to want to publish anything by James Lyons-Weiler. I've called for basically the resignation of the people in CDC over their screw up on the tests, and I think time will bear this out as true. That Dr. Anthony Fauci also bears responsibility for where we are right now by not being forthright and saying, "Listen, we screwed up, and now we need the German test right now." He said, "Oh, we're going to bring in the commercial partners," and that's it. We got to get away from American-style fascism and the regulatory agencies, and that is my life's mission: is to put an end to that practice of putting profit before people in regulatory industries. That's so important. I can't tell you. We need independent. We need to kick the corporations out of government. There's no two ways about it. And so
that's the real money ball. And what's going to come out of this is, and this is the other thing. It's like, unfortunately, you and I both, being extremely ethical people, and obviously I cross lines here and there, but that's what radiologists do. Sometimes we have to kind of do that. But when you look at the big fraud kind of complex and what's going on in science, and how much fraud has now entered into when we were coming out of college and high school. I know this from prior conversations about you or with you, and we came into this world of science as idealists.
Yep.
And then we established our careers, in Pittsburgh and Bismarck, and then we both started to look around and see fraud getting covered up, and you dig deeper and deeper into how much fraud is really going on. And just you and I are the same that way. It's like, once you start to see it, wait, this is not right. This is not how this works. And once you start to see that, and you start to see how many powerful people have been literally, defrauding the American taxpayer, and that's where it's like, no, if we bring it all back to tax law, and we bring it all back to, Federal False Claims Act or racketeering and RICO law, you look at this, you look at what's going on and some of the decisions that are being made right now, and some people who are way too grafted in they're committing fraud against the U.S. taxpayer right now.
Yep, that's right.
And justifying it as, well, it's an emergency. Okay, well, after the chips kind of fall where they may, and we may be in this whole situation in the fall again, because there's not going to be a vaccine that's ever going to work against coronavirus, just like HIV. And I mean, there was that paper that Dr. Crum pointed this one out to me, where the HIV levels of glutathione and CD4 cells, the lower you go, more associated.
I have that here. Let's talk about that. Yeah, let's do that. Go ahead and start it. I'll find it.
But so I'm just going to call Fauci out right here and right now. He knows Dr. Crum's product works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a whole complex of people that have been wanting to watch this thing go off patent. And now he just got a new use patent on it. And
there you go.
That's where it's like, how can you as Dr. Fauci be talking to Dr. Albert B. Crum, last fall, and there's NIH related research going on here, and it's like, we're not going to tell anybody that this does anything. We're not going to implement it.
Well, that's the biggest crime of science.
we're not going to fast track this right into UNMC, where the vice chancellor of UNMC biosecurity is married to my cousin, and he's the guy he's the guy that Space Command basically of ground zero for COVID on this continent. Which, when these people were extracted from Wuhan, they went right to Omaha, Nebraska, and right into my cousin's purview at the University of Nebraska Medical Center.
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna need his contact information.
That Fauci, all these people they don't want to look at the answer here. And show that answer again. HIV. Show that answer again.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's coming.
And you can decode this for everyone just by looking at this graph.
Right. So this is the number of days that have gone on since the treatment of our HIV-infected individuals. This is the percent that were surviving, and these are the CD cells that CD levels, CD4 levels greater than 0.91. These are CD4 levels less than 0.91. And by typing these cells, now is there a relationship between those CD4, the glutathione, I guess, is the GSB, right? GSB levels.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, so look at that. There's a huge difference in the survivorship.
When you have a certain level of glutathione of 0.91 or above, and the units aren't on there, but that's a basic Kaplan-Meier survival curve,
right?
Which we do in human beings too. And so when you
this is the percent surviving here over time, and there's a higher amount of survivorship here, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what does that tell you? Survival is directly linked in these T cells.
Yep. That
are infected with HIV to the amount of glutathione inside the T cell. Period. Okay. End. That's the Statue of Liberty play right there.
All right, so my turn for a rant, and then I'm going to give you the closing out. All right, so here we go. My rant is: the United States government knew that Germans had a test. The United States government and scientists abroad knew that the Chinese had already done studies on antivirals. Had already done studies on antivirals, including high-dose vitamin C. The United States knows that accurate testing is important, and that's why South Korea has bent the curve so successfully. Taiwan, Hong Kong, contact tracing is impossible without an accurate curve. The CDC put out a test without testing it, without validating it, after rejecting that accurate test. Now I learned that Anthony Fauci, in particular, knows about the value of glutathione enhancing product and this GSB relationship. And so it's not time to get mad. It's time to get active. Every person within the sound of my voice needs to contact their legislators and have them investigate through a congressional hearing by Zoom meeting if they have to, how to get the CDC no longer involved in public health. Plain and simple. They have screwed us. They have put us in this situation. They have delayed testing. They have delayed therapeutics. I was 2.5 weeks ahead. Then I was a week and a half ahead. Everything that you're seeing that they're doing now. Oh, okay, yeah, maybe we should test IV vitamin C. Right? Initially, like 3 weeks ago, don't put your hands above your shoulders. Don't touch. Wash your surfaces. Okay? They're behind the 8 ball. It wasn't public health that told you to wash your hands. It was James Lyons-Weiler at IPAC that told you to wash your hands and stop and do the elbow bump, okay? Because I saw this coming, and you've got to stop denying that it's real. You have to stop denying that it's real and get behind holding CDC accountable for how they are responsible for the 80,000 deaths that are going to occur in the United States if we all go back to work tomorrow. In 30 days. That's the projection, all right? Now, we don't have any faith. They've destroyed faith in science. That's make projection science. They've destroyed faith in epidemiology. They destroyed confidence in science. That's because they fed you pseudoscience. I'm a scientist. Ted's a scientist. We're calling for the end of CDC, centralization of power, centralization of authority, centralization of everything that's going to affect your life, your child's life, your grandchildren's life, not just through this epidemic, this pandemic, but throughout the rest of our lives. They have no role to play in the future in public health. shut them down. We don't need them.
Yeah.
They have totally showed that they are redundant and incompetent and less than helpful. They are absolutely harmful. That's my rant. Cue up Ted. You're on the way out.
Homeland, biosecurity. So this is where, when if we create a new agency that is, I'm just going to call on the Bill of Rights and states' rights and the First Amendment,
yep.
and the decentralization. This is part of the major political problem. We need to decentralize. We need to have 50 states that have their own way of patchworking a lot of this stuff in at a higher level than, the public health officers at every state are basically that all they do is take orders from CDC anyway. And it's
right.
like we need to reverse that. We need to have states' rights come back into vogue so that we as a state are prepared in the future for this again, and we're not totally relying on people who are controlled by big money in DC and Atlanta.
Yep.
Walk like an Egyptian.
Looking good, Ted. So I agree completely. This has been a fascinating and perfect way to empower people. Listen, what I would like to do is see a loosely connected network of really super smart and creative people who right now are pulling their hairs out in academia saying, I have a solution for this. I have an answer, but they're not listening to me. We need to find and empower those people. The best Homeland Biosecurity Department that we have is not located in Washington, D.C. It's not located in Bethesda. It's not located in CDC. It is physically distributed across the country, maybe at universities, maybe within corporations, maybe in someone's living room. We are America. We are not corporate America. We have so many creative minds out there that are stifled by the people who figured out how to get the contract and keep the contract for 30 years. That's all they know how to do. One size fits all. And when you see that happening, that's when you call and you say, listen, that put us at risk. This outbreak, this pandemic, the 80,000 that are going to die in the next 30 days, and the 80,000 that are going to die 15 days later after that, and the 80,000 that are going to die 3 to 4 days after that, if we do nothing.
Right.
That falls on the lap, and that's important. If we do nothing, that we are doing something. That falls on the lap of whatever motherfucker decided that they were going to make their own test at CDC. They own this, and we have to go after them.
What the Fogarty?
Thank you.
What the Fogarty?
You're a good Christian boy. I'm sorry about that. I've been carrying this around.
Don't be a schmidhead.
Don't
be a schmidhead, okay?
Don't be a schmidhead.
Don't be a schmidhead.
Yeah, we got it.
Go Tank.
All right.
Keep it positive.
Well, that's for another.
This is the thing. Like my grandma Dorothy Seamanite Schmidt, who used to help out in D.C. with some folks in the farming world, and Howard Buffett when he was congressman. But that's Warren's dad, by the way. She would say, "Garbage in, garbage out," and I'm saying, as her grandson, we have dishonored the entire profession of medicine by all of these people who are not physicians practicing medicine through our licensure as public health officials, and the vast majority of them aren't physicians. There's like maybe 3 physicians who are actually public health heads at a state level. That's what the Fogarty is wrong with this country. There are a bunch of people who have basically come in from a corporate and governmental shutdown of the first social entrepreneurial profession on the planet. Well, actually the second. We know what that is. The first is actually something else. The second, the shamanic culture, the shaman, which was split in the Western civilization from priest on one side to a rabbi or and then medicine has become this religion. It has become a religion. Modern medicine has become a religion, not of science, but it's a religion of codification of corporates and governmental power, political power, and economic power that then tells all of us, like the Catholic Church was telling everyone in Germany, back when Martin Luther had his day in the sun, and as a Catholic priest said, you know what, this is all wrong. This is all wrong. You do not need to get to God through the Catholic Church. That's a fallacy of taxation without representation in spiritual matters. And so the CDC, the centralized government system, the federal system, all this real abuse of the Bill of Rights that's going on right now, including my free speech. So I'm going to just say it right here and right now for you, my brother, Jack. Treat COVID-19 with Albert B. Crumb's patented simple devices. Okay?
I am so about prophylactic.
Honey got through the FDA as a device. It's a device. It's not a medication. So FDA approval for medical grade honey came through on a device play. And so since all of my devices in radiology, including hyperbaric chambers too, are very easily can get through the FDA approval process as a device compared to medications, these three nanotechnology building blocks patented by Dr. Albert B. Crumb are the oldest vitamin on a unicellular play and understanding in the history of the planet for any species that has any touch point to oxygen. And so literally every living cell touching oxygen on this planet has these three vital amines, which the term vitamin actually came from a Polish biochemist named Funk in 1912. And he called it from the Latin vitae, vital, and amine, after I think he discovered thiamine or whatever. He went to Fogarty, he was a little off, okay? So I'm just saying, he looked at it from an organismal level, and if you look evolutionary speaking from a unicellular level, it's these three amino acids that we need to treat ourselves with. And we can do it through the laws of physics too. I mean, I'm going to invoke the laws of physics. Which, tell me, Jack, do the laws of physics change at different principles of, the laws of thermodynamics? Does somehow at 1.3 atmospheres room air to 1.4 to 1.5, is there a law of physics that says, oh yeah, that doesn't work from this level below?
In our present location in the universe at this particular time, we have to give those caveats. We have these constants for sure, but I'm going to hedge the rest of it. So,
well,
anyway,
if you go to space, you better be in a pressure vessel. And here's the other thing: when you're flying commercial and you're losing 4 psi per flight for an hour on your body in atmospheric pressure. That's the same pressure change in reverse from what Dr. Hartz used to revive Eden Carlson. And so when it's that, and my initials are EFF, and when it's that EFFing easy, and people are out to shroud this from the world, to shroud the answer, the resurrection of mitochondrial answer to dementia, the resurrection of children and families and their mothers. There's a mother in Texas that called me yesterday and thanked me for sending her Albert B. Crumb's formulation for intracellular glutathione synthesis. And in another few weeks, she's going to be in New Orleans if she can get there with, who knows what the travel situation is going to be. She's either going to be there in New Orleans or she's going to stay in Dallas and hang out with my good friend, Dr. Al Johnson, DO, who is the treasurer of the International Hyperbaric Medical Foundation, and his practice is in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. And so this child will be healed, and this is a Nobel Prize.
That's beautiful.
You know, these guys that won the Nobel for oxygen, like last year, it's like, okay, that was great, really important, but who's been reviving all these people in real world?
Yeah.
Arch, and then and his whole crowd, and you go on and say, okay, well, now that the big industrialists of Israel have taken after this, maybe Shia Friday is going to win the Nobel. I don't know. My dream is actually that Shia Friday, Paul Harch, and ABCMD, Dr. Albert B. Crum, are awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology before Dr. Crum dies. So Dr. Crum is 88, and he could probably live. He's probably Malthusian with all of his great stuff going on anyway. But I don't want to wait until he's 108 for this. I would like to see this before he hits, 100 or maybe 95 or even 90.
I know no one who has worked as hard as you have to popularize the concept that, guess what, oxygen's important for mammalian tissue. Listen, we got to go. Ted, this is great. Thank you so much. We're going to have you back again when we can do this live face to face. I can't wait to do it.
Vitamin G coming right at you.